Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right, this episode, we're going international, because America's not the only place where tough guys get things done. Today, we're going to be talking about the Kray brothers, in particular, the Kray twins, Reginald and Ronald, and their rise to become the biggest underworld figures London has ever seen. The Kray twins entered this world on October 24th, 1933. Reginald came first, and 10 minutes later, Ronald made his debut. At 3 years old, they both suffered from the flu and diphtheria and were hospitalized. Reg recovered, but Ron remained in the hospital until his mother Violet walked in and said that she would take him home. Once Ron was reunited with his brother, he quickly improved. The Kray family consisted of their mother Violet, father Charlie, and their older brother, also named Charlie. While still young, the family moved from Hoxton to Bethel Green and settled at 178 Valence Road. Bethel Green was a slum, filled with poor people and pubs, and the twins learned early on that they enjoyed fighting. They formed a gang of kids just like them, and they had brick fights with other gangs of kids just like them. Soon they figured out that violence as a method of solving problems was very effective. Fighting came naturally to the Krays. It was in their blood. Their grandfather, Southpaw Cannonball Lee, was a former professional boxer, and the boys looked up to him. When World War II started, Charlie Kray, the boys' father, was conscripted for duty. But he decided that he was not going to go. He spent the war running from safe house to safe house, always one step ahead of the authorities. The Krays survived the war and the Blitz, despite Charlie being gone and the Germans bombing the hell out of Bethel Green through Violet's determination. When the war ended, they were 11, and they got the urge to box seriously. Their older brother Charlie did some boxing in the Navy, and he began to train the twins. They set up a makeshift gym in the house, and the neighborhood kids came by to train. By the time they were 15, Reg was seen as one of the best young boxers in London. In 1948, he won the London Schoolboy Boxing Championship. Reg would have his first brush with the law around this time. The Kray family was on the train, headed back to London after a day in the country. The twins had an air gun, the type that shoots pellets. Reg decided to open the window and let a few pellets fly. The train guard grabbed him and placed him in his cabin under arrest. Although no one was hurt, Reg was taken to court where he would get off with a warning. Their dreams of becoming professional boxers were officially dashed on March 26, 1950. The twins and their gang got into an argument outside of a dance hall with another youth gang. The fight got out of hand and the twins were arrested for causing grievous bodily harm after they beat Ronald Harvey across the face and body with a bike chain. A woman named Sheila Coates, who witnessed the attack outside the dance hall, was told that if she talked, a razor would be put across her face. Harvey broke the code and told the police himself. The boys were arrested along with Thomas Organ and Patrick Alcott. They were given probation, but the boxing community didn't want anything else to do with Reg, and he was blackballed despite being undefeated at 7-0. So with boxing no longer an option, the kids turned to the other career path available to kids in Bethel Green: crime. The crimes the boys partook in were nothing big. A few burglaries here and there, but for the most part, what they did was fight. The young Kray gang was the toughest of the neighborhood gangs, and the twins were the toughest in their own gang, and they shared leadership. Like most twins, Ron and Reg fought each other constantly, but anyone who laid a hand on either one would have to deal with both of them. On October 24th, 1950, 17-year-old Ron and Reg and a few others were lazing about on the Bethel Green corner when Constable Donald Baton came along and kindly told Ron and his buddies to move along by roughly shoving Ron in the back. Ron reacted in typical Kray fashion. He knocked the constable out with a single slap. A few minutes later, more cops showed up. Ron was arrested and was given a thorough beating on his way to jail. When Reg heard about this, he lost it. He knew he couldn't fight the whole police station, so he went looking for the cop who started it all. When Reg found Constable Baton, he too slapped him in the face. As a result, he and 16-year-old Patrick Ernest were arrested. The twins would receive probation. In 1953, they gave the army life a try. They were called up to the Tower of London and joined the Royal Fusiliers. Unlike their father, they showed up for duty, with the plans of becoming physical training instructors. Being boxers, they thought that this would be the perfect job. After a few weeks, they told the corporal that they wanted to be training instructors or they didn't want to be in the army. The corporal told them they will bloody well do as they're told. The twins looked at each other, turned, and began to walk out. The corporal said, "Where the bloody hell do you think you're going?" "We're going back to Valence Road." The corporal went after them and grabbed Ron's arm. Ron spun and caught the man across the face with a slap so hard it put him to sleep. The next day, the twins were arrested in their family home on Valence Road. They were charged with being absent without leave and striking an officer, although the authorities couldn't figure out which of the twins struck the corporal. They were both sentenced to 7 days in the guardhouse. In the guardhouse, they met another East Sider named Dickie Hughes, and the three decided that they were going to escape as soon as they got out of the guardhouse. And that's what they did. Dickie and the twins went back to the East Side and moved from house to house, one step ahead of the military police. While on the run, the boys got back to their street brawling ways, and they were captured in a cafe and sent back to the guardhouse after a beating from the guards. A few weeks later, they escaped again. This time, they were spotted by an MP again in the cafe, and he approached them and said, "Come on, you bloody deserters." Ron didn't appreciate the man's tone and gave him a slap across the mouth that put him to sleep. A few weeks later, the army caught up with them. This time, they were given 3 months in Shepton Mallet. When they were in Shepton, they met Charlie Richardson, a man who down the road would become their biggest enemy. But that was in the future. For now, Richardson and the Krays got along well in Shepton. It was during his time in Shepton that Ron discovered 2 things about himself. One was that he was not right in the head. He had begun to experience signs of mental illness and was hearing voices, and the voices were telling him to hurt people. He was diagnosed by doctors and given medication. The other thing he learned about himself was that he preferred men over women. He considered himself to be bisexual and would later surround himself with boys, many on the younger side. By now, the army had had enough of the Kray twins, and they were dishonorably discharged. They returned to Valence Road and began their criminal careers. They started to hang out at a billiard hall called the Regal on Mile End. The Regal was already a tough place, and the owners were not able to control the crowds of ruffians that frequented it. When the Krays began to hang out there, it got worse. Eventually, the owner was kicked out by his landlord for not being able to keep the rowdies out. The Krays went to the landlord and told him that they could keep the place in order, and he gave them a 1-month trial for £5. The twins' reputation kept the unsavory out, and the place began to make money. This got the attention of a gang of Maltese gangsters who made their living extorting protection money from local businesses. This time, they picked the wrong place. They walked in and tried to put the squeeze on the twins. The twins and their gang pulled cutlasses and chased them off. The Regal became the place to be if you were a young street fighter, fresh out of jail, or the army. As their reputation grew, Reg was respected as the reasonable one, but the people feared Ron. He was impulsive. It was Ron who planned out the raids on rival gangs. When the Regal was crowded and the men were drunk, Ron would announce, "Well, we decided on a little row with so-and-so," and he would call for a vote. Usually the vote was to fight. The gang would grab their weapons, and they had a lot of them, pile into their cars and head off to the destination. Ron loved guns, and they had a few pistols, but the Krays were more primal. The Krays had several cutlasses, bayonets, and machetes, and Ron refused to use razors, which was the preferred weapon by most London criminals. His logic was, you can't put any force behind a razor. Ron ran the raids with military precision, which is odd because they were not good soldiers. He had a group of teenage boys who he used as his intelligence arm. They would go out and scout the enemy and bring back the intel. Ron had studied American gangsters and began to not only dress like his idol Al Capone, he began to play the role as well. The twins ran the gang like an army. Members who failed an assignment or showed cowardice would be brought before a court-martial. He would be given the opportunity to give his side of the story, and Ron stood as judge. Punishments include banishment from the gang, beatings, or time in the hole, which is the old house behind the Regal. The club became the unofficial headquarters for what will become the Kray gang. The boys attracted others of their ilk and soon had enough tough guys with them to start their own protection racket. Unlike others in that line of work, the Krays actually offered protection. If they had a contract with a business, no one with any sense would try anything. But we know not everyone has sense. One of them was a former boxer. He tried to muscle in on a garage under the twins' protection. When he came into the place, the owner told him that he didn't have any money on hand and told him to come back the next day. Then he called Ron. When the man came back the next day, the owner made another call. In minutes, Ron came with a few of his tough guys. Ron got into the face of the boxer, and the boxer began to get loud. Ron didn't hesitate. He pulled the Luger, and shots rang out. Ron put one slug into the man's leg, turned around, and walked off. The next day, Reg sent money to the man in the hospital to keep his mouth shut. During the late 40s and 50s, the two biggest gangsters in London were Billy Hill and Jack Comer, known as Jack the Spot. Billy Hill was born on December 13, 1911. Growing up, he was surrounded by criminals. Most of them were his own family. He was 14 when he stabbed a man for the first time, and he spent the rest of his teens honing his criminal skills. burglarizing houses, pulling smash and grabs, and eventually graduating to jewelry and fur robberies. When World War II broke out, Billy took advantage. He sold gasoline, food, and other items the British government put restrictions on the black market. And he was the man to see for any deserter looking for forged papers. In the late 40s, Billy teamed up with the self-proclaimed gangster #1, Jack Spot. Jack Comer was born on April 12, 1912 in Mile End. Son of a Jewish immigrant, he grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Fledgegate Mansion, Whitechapel. Jack liked to fight, a lot. When Hitler's anti-Semitic rhetoric made its way to London, Jack put together a gang of tough guys to battle the brown shirts in the streets. For a few years, Billy Hill and Jack Spot ruled London's underworld. They ran protection rackets, had gambling dens, nightclubs, and brothels. In the late 40s, Billy Hill was charged with a warehouse burglary and ran off to South Africa, where he was arrested for assault, sent back to England, and sentenced to 4 years. In 1955, Billy was back in London, but Jack had become comfortable with the #1 spot. Billy and Jack had a fallout after Jack Spot and a member of Billy's gang, Albert Dimes, engaged in a running stiletto battle. In front of dozens of witnesses, the two men hacked away at each other with knives. Jack went to the hospital to be treated for a stab wound in the lung. Dimes was taken to another hospital with a stab wound in the gut. Both would survive. Jack Spot had known about the twins for a while, but he had no need for them up until now. He went to the Regal and asked the twins for their support and protection in exchange for their own gambling territory. The twins agreed, and the three men made their partnership public when the twins accompanied Jack to the racetrack in front of the whole of London's underworld. Siding with Jack put a target on their back, but they didn't care. The boys received word that Billy's men, led by Mad Frankie Frazier and George Cornell, had put the word out and invited the Krays to a scrap at a bar. The twins didn't hesitate. They got their men and their weapons and they headed over to the bar. When they got there, the place was empty, but they didn't leave. They came for a fight and waited for the place to close, but no one showed. Billy Hill had gotten wind of the fight and told his men to cancel it. Neither him nor Jack wanted to see this escalate into murder or an all-out war. After a few weeks, Jack paid the twins and let them go. 2 weeks later, on August 11, 1955, at 12 in the afternoon, Jack Comer and his wife were returning to their flat at Hyde Park Mansion. As they entered the doorway, three men ran from behind the car and rushed into the doorway. They pushed his wife aside and slashed Jack's face across his right side. The man ran off, and Jack's wife called the police. He was taken to the hospital where they thought he would lose his right eye, but luckily for him, the doctors performed a miracle and he kept the eye. He would leave London and retire. Billy Hill would also retire, leaving a void that the twins quickly moved in to fill. In 1956, the Krays got a foothold in the West End when a guy named Billy Jones opened a pub and had a problem. The patrons were a bit too rowdy and fought a lot, causing damages to the pub and bringing unwanted attention from the law. The Krays came in and let it be known that the place was now under their protection. In August, Bobby Ramsey, Jones's partner, was badly beaten by a group of Irish dock workers who called themselves the Watney Streeters. After finding out where the Irishman hung out, on August 28th, the twins, Billy Jones, Bobby Ramsey, and about 10 more men waited for them outside the Britannia pub. When the Irishmen came out, they were met with machetes, crowbars, and a bayonet. A man named Terrence Martin was badly injured, and he was taken to the hospital carved up like a goose. He broke the underworld code and identified Ron, Billy Jones, and Bobby Ramsey as his attackers. A little after midnight on August 29, 1956, the police pulled Ramsey's car over as he and Ron drove. They said that they had reason to believe that they had taken part in assaulting Martin. When they searched the car, they found a bayonet on the floor next to Ron and a crowbar in the trunk. Blood was noticed on the car, as well as Ron and Bobby. When asked where the blood came from, Bobby replied, "I must have cut myself." When Ron was asked the same question, he replied, "I must have cut myself too." They were taken to the station where police found a loaded revolver in Ron's coat pocket. When they pulled it out, Ron said, "Be careful, it's loaded." That it was. The police found 6 dum-dum bullets in the pistol. Ron, Bobby, and Billy were found guilty of causing serious bodily harm, and Ron was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. Ron entered Wadsworth Prison as one of the most feared gangsters in London, and he used that to his advantage. He became the biggest tobacco smuggler in the prison, which increased his status. During the last few years of his sentence, he was transferred to Camp Hill Prison. He began to suffer again from paranoia and thought that everyone was out to get him. He assaulted prisoners and guards who he thought were plotting on him. He was placed in the psychiatric wing of Winchester Prison, declared insane, and given medication for his condition. In 1962, Reg and Charlie went to visit Ron. Charlie and Reg stood by the bed, and Reg said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I have to use the toilet." A few moments later, Ron said, "I have to use the toilet as well." When Ron got into the bathroom, he and Reg exchanged clothes. When they came out, Reg got into Ron's bed, and Ron walked out the front door with Charlie. A half an hour later, Reg got up, walked to the front desk, and told them he was going home. The guard said, "No, you're not." Reg said, "Yes, I am. My name is Reginald Kray, and if you don't believe me, here's my driver's license." When the police questioned him, he said that he was tired and decided to take a nap on Ron's bed. When he woke up, he and Charlie were gone. He was let go. Ron stayed on the run for a few months, hiding out on the farm of a family friend, until he got bored and voluntarily returned to finish a sentence. He was released in 1959. He continued to be treated for his mental illness outside, but he was still having the urge to kill people. And a few weeks after returning, he almost did. Ron was in a club called the Central in Clerkenwell with a friend. The Central was an Italian hangout. When Ron's friend got into an argument with an Italian man named Billy Alco, Ron thought that Alco was going to kill him, so he struck first. He pulled his revolver and fired at Alco. He missed him and only managed to kill a painting on the wall. While Ron was away, Reg was taking care of business and growing the gang which they called the Firm. He opened more nightclubs and gambling spots and expanded the protection racket into areas formerly run by Billy Hill and Jack Spot. By the time Ron got out, Reg had the operation running smooth. They were making a lot of money and had a guy to cook the books, so they didn't pay much, if any, in taxes. In 1964, the Inland Revenue Service, the British version of the IRS, gave them an option: pay up or go to jail. They paid up, but they still had more money than they could spend. So when a man named Ernest Shimwell came to Ron with an investment opportunity, the twins jumped on it. Shimwell had a contract to build schools and housing in the capital of Nigeria. The twins gave Shimwell 25,000 pounds with the promise of more. Ron took several trips to Nigeria and was chauffeured around by the Nigerian Prime Minister, shown the city and treated like royalty. They would later find out that it was their money that was being used to pamper them. Lord Robert John Graham Boothby was a member of the British Conservative Party and a known investor. After Shimwell made the introduction, Ron and Teddy Smith went to visit Lord Boothby and discuss investing in a Nigerian project. They met in his office and he thanked them for coming, but told them he was not interested in the deal. But he did agree to sit and be photographed. A few days later, the Mirror printed an article saying that Boothby was in a homosexual relationship with a leading thug from London's underworld. They did not name Ron by name, but it was inferred. Both Ron and Lord Boothby sued the Mirror for libel. 2 weeks later, the Mirror printed a retraction and an apology, and Ron was awarded 40,000 pounds in his lawsuit. The Krays were looking to expand internationally. They had the idea of teaming up with the American Mafia. They were introduced to an American named Alan Cooper, who said that he was connected in the States. Cooper arranged for Ron, despite being a convicted criminal, and Dickie Morgan to go to New York via Paris. In the Big Apple, Ron was introduced to another fixer. Ron told him his plans, and the meeting was set up with Frank Iliano, a member of the Gallo crew from Brooklyn. Ron Kray went to President Street and met with Frank and the rest of the Gallo gang, including Frank's brother Armando, known as Mongo the Midget. Frank and Ron were introduced. Ron told him that he could check his credentials out with Angelo Bruno, who was familiar with the London underworld. Frank made a phone call to Philly, and word came back that the Krays were okay. Ron and Dickie hung out with the Gallos while they were in New York, and a few days later, they returned to London with real connections and big plans. Not long after returning from New York, the twins received a message that Angelo Bruno, the boss of the Philadelphia Mafia, was coming to London and wanted to meet with them. They booked a hotel, and they ironed out a deal where the Krays would guarantee protection for the Mafia's interests in London. On April 19, 1965, Reg married Frances Shea. Frances was the sister of Frank Shea, an associate of the firm and a guy who sometimes drove Reggie. He first proposed to her in 1961 when she was 18, but she wasn't ready. He proposed to her again, and this time she accepted. The two honeymooned in Greece, but Reg spent his nights out on the town while his young bride stayed in a hotel. The marriage only lasted a few months before Frances went back to her mother. They never officially divorced, but they never got back together. By the 1960s, the Kray firm consisted of some of the toughest guys in the city. Ian Barry, was a former tank man in the Army and had been scarred with shrapnel. He would be Ronnie's main muscle and bodyguard. Mad Teddy Smith, a psychopath who was especially violent when drunk. Like Ron, he had been declared insane while in prison, and like Ron, he was gay. He and Ron were in a relationship for years and often fought like dysfunctional couples do. Teddy was also allegedly involved in a relationship with Labor MP Tom Drisberg, who would give information to Teddy about his rich friends so that Teddy could burglarize them in exchange for sexual favors from Teddy. On October 1st, 1964, Mad Teddy walked into the Hideaway Club owned by Hugh McCowan, busted the place up, and demanded money from McCowan on Kray's behalf. McCowan did the unthinkable and went to the police. He told them that the Krays were pressuring him to give them one half of his profits. On January 7th, 1965, the twins and Teddy were arrested. They were charged with menacing, but beat the case with the help of a high-priced lawyer and witnesses not willing to testify. Lenny Hamilton did not know the Krays when he first met them back in the 50s. He just saw two men being arrested and fighting with the cops. He jumped in and helped the two men escape and was arrested for it. When he got out, Reg saw him at a club, thanked him, and offered him a position in the firm. One night while out on the town in 1962, Lenny got into an argument with Bonner Ward, the son of a well-known gangster named Buller Ward. Bonner felt that Lenny Hamilton had disrespected one of the women in his party and threatened him. Pat Connolly, another firm member, told Bonner that Lenny was with the Krays and to lay off. But Bonner couldn't. When Lenny went to the bathroom, Bonner followed him and tried to slash him with a razor, but Hamilton was able to dodge the assault and ended up beating Bonner to a pulp and leaving him in a corner in the bathroom. This caused some irritation for the twins. Bonner's father, Buller, was a serious man and an ally of the Krays. A few nights later, Lenny received a phone call from Ron telling him to come to Esmeralda's Barn, one of the firm's nightclubs. When Lenny arrived, the place was empty except for Ron and two other men. Lenny was forced into a chair and watched as Ron took a steel knife sharpener from a gas stove. He held it in front of Lenny's face and told him that he had caused a lot of trouble by beating Bonner like that. Ron began to press the red-hot sharpener against Lenny's clothes, causing them to catch fire. Then he pressed it against Lenny's cheek, then held it over his eyebrows, burning them off. Before he could burn Lenny's eyes out, another member stopped him. Ron walked away, and Lenny was left with a warning. Albert Donahue was a longtime criminal, a friend of the Krays and Lenny Hamilton. When he saw Lenny's face after Ron got through with it, he said some bad things about the twins that got back to them. Luckily for him, he was sent away for 3 years on an attempted larceny charge. When he got out, Reggie wasted no time in putting him in his place. One night, Albert was out at a bar drinking, having a good time, when everyone around him started to move. He turned and saw Reg coming at him. Before he could say anything, Reg shot him in the leg. He was dragged outside and told to come to see the twins when he got better. He kept his mouth shut, and when he came to see the twins, he was given a position as Reg's driver and bodyguard. Ronnie Hart was a cousin of the twins and was already a small-time criminal when he knocked on the door of 178 Valent Street and told the twins, "I'm your cousin, I want to join your gang." After checking his story, he was allowed in. Leslie Payne was a more sophisticated gangster. When he joined the gang, they started to expand into casinos and nightclubs, and he introduced them to more ways of making a pound. He was not a tough guy, and the Kray's violence eventually caused him to leave the gang. We'll get back to him in a minute. Along with a few others like the hulking Pat Connolly, Ronnie Bender, and the Lambriano brothers, Tony and Chris, the firm was formidable. But unlike their American counterparts, the Krays didn't always delegate violence to their subordinates. They were still hands-on. Like the time when Reg was in the Regal and a low-level hanger-on approached him and said something that didn't sit well with him. Reg said nothing. He finished his drink and left. In the car, the incident was stewing in his head, and he told the driver to turn around. He went back to the Regal, approached the man, and told him to come into the bathroom. The man followed. Reg took a knife to the man's face, carved it up, washed his hands, and calmly walked out. The man was found in the bathroom with his face hanging off, and it would take almost 100 stitches to put it back together again. The Richardson gang were the Krays' biggest rivals. Like the Krays, they were led by two brothers, Charlie and Edward. They were from the South End and operated out of a scrap metal yard that was a front for their real businesses: loan sharking, burglary, and extortion. Like I said, the twins met Charlie while they were locked up, and they got along well inside, but on the streets they clashed. The Richardsons had two men they used for muscle: Mad Frankie Frazier, one of the men that carved Jack Spot up back in '55, and George Cornell, a brutal and sadistic East Ender who had moved to the South End. They both used to work for Billy Hill, but now they were with the Richardsons. The Richardsons were a brutal gang, and their intimidation techniques involved torture. Cornell and Frazier fit right in. The Richardsons were supposed to be part of the deal the Krays had with the Mafia, and even attended a meeting with a Bruno representative where the Richardson men insulted the rep. The Richardsons wanted their own deal with the Mafia and were looking to remove the Krays from the underworld permanently. The twins found out about this and a meeting was called. In late December 1965, the two gangs met at the Astor Club. The twins showed up with their muscle, Ian Barry and Ronnie Hart, and the Richardsons came with Frazier and Cornell. During the meeting, George Cornell kept throwing verbal jabs at the twins and said that the Krays were talking rubbish. As the meeting broke up, Cornell said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Take no notice of Kray, he's just a fat poof." Sounds harmless, but Ron took the homophobic slurs personally, and in his mind, George Cornell was a dead man walking. On March 8, 1966, Charlie and Eddie Richardson, along with Mad Francis, George Cornell, and a few more Richardson members, pulled up in front of Mr. Smith and the Witch Doctors, a pub in Rushy Green. The twins had a small stake in the bar, but it was not one of their hangouts. Someone told the Richardsons that they would be there, and they came looking. They busted in with knives and pistols, but only found one Kray member, Richard Dickie Hart, so they worked him over. But the other men in the place were tough guys too, and they didn't like the Richardsons interrupting their drinking, and a full-scale melee ensued, followed by the roar of a shotgun that woke the neighbors. They looked out of their window and saw Mad Francis Frazier laying on the pavement with a leg wound from a .45 and shotgun pellet wounds. Eddie Richardson and Harry Rowling were also laid down by shotgun pellets, and several more Richardsons were being piled into cars bleeding. When the police arrived, a .45 was discovered and a shotgun was found. Dickie Hart, after staggering 50 feet with a bullet in his gut, was found dead in the garden of Postman Frederick Peters. Ron had had enough with the Richardsons. Even though Hart was a low-level member, he was one of them, and he had to be avenged. The next night, George Cornell and his pals Albie Woods and John Dale were returning from visiting a friend at the hospital. They decided to stop and have a drink, and they stopped at the Blind Beggar in the Whitechapel Road. The place was empty except for a 79-year-old man and a barmaid. The Blind Beggar was well in Kray territory, and in no time, Ron received a call from one of his spies that Cornell was in the Beggar. Ron called Jack Dickinson and told him to bring the car to his flat and pick up Ian Barry on the way. Ron got his 9mm Mauser, loaded it, and met them outside. They got to the Blind Beggar at 8:30 p.m., and Ron told Jack Dickinson to stay in the car and keep the engine running. When Ron and Ian walked in, they saw Cornell and his men sitting at the end of the bar. Ron and Ian made a beeline past the barmaid, and the song "The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore" by the Walker Brothers was playing on the jukebox. George didn't get the hint. When Ron and Ian walked up, George gave a sneer and turned on his stool and faced him. "Well, look who's here," Cornell said. Ron said nothing. He just raised his Mauser and put it to Cornell's forehead. Cornell sneered again, thinking it was all a bluff, but it was no bluff. Ron paused for a second, and then shots rang out. Ron put one bullet through Cornell's head. He fell back on the bar. Ron and Ian calmly walked out, got back into the car, and drove off. They made their way to one of their hangouts, where he had someone get rid of the gun. He changed his clothes and cleaned the powder residue from under his nails. Then he called his brother, and they had a meeting on what to do next. 3 hours later, they heard on the radio that Cornell was dead. Ron said, "Good. Dead man can't talk." The next day, Ron and Reg were arrested. The cops knew one of the Krays shot George Cornell, but they didn't know which one. Members of the firm had visited the witnesses with large envelopes and warnings to keep their mouths shut. With no evidence and no one willing to testify against them, the twins walked. With Cornell dead, Frazier in jail for the murder of Dickie Hart, the Richardson gang was almost done, but the final blow wouldn't come until 1967, when the Richardsons were found guilty of fraud, extortion, assault, and torture. Charlie was sentenced to 25 years, and Eddie was given an additional 10 years on top of the time he was already serving for extortion. The Krays were now the undisputed kings of crime in London. They had become celebrity gangsters, and in their mind, they could do whatever they wanted and get away with it. They felt untouchable. Back on July 8, 1958, a man named Frank Mitchell broke out of the Broadmoor Mental Institution. While on the run, he broke into an elderly couple's home, threatened them with an axe, and stole their car. He later abandoned it. He was captured the next day after partying with a couple of young women he met in a pub. This incident earned him the name the Mad Axeman. Mitchell was a big man who stood somewhere between 5'11 and 6'3", and was strong enough to move a car. He had been in and out of jail since he was 17 years old, mostly for breaking and entering. During the 50s, he escaped several times. In 1955, he was declared to be mentally defective. Reggie met and became friends with Frank while he was visiting Ron in Broadmoor Prison. Frank was a terror in the prisons. He was a pain in the ass to the inmates as well as the guards, and several times he was put in a hole for slashing and injuring both. But he and Ron hit it off. In 1966, he was in Dartmoor Prison. He wrote a letter to the twins asking them to help him escape. On December 12, 1966, Frank slipped away from his work detail and made his way to a waiting car driven by Albert Donahue and Mad Teddy Smith. The plan was to hide Frank in a London flat and send letters to the national papers and the government and tell them that if Frank's case would be reconsidered, he would voluntarily return to jail. In the flat, he had everything provided for him: food, clothes, and the company of a female nightclub hostess named Lisa Prescott. But it seemed he had traded one prison for another. The letters to the government gained him nothing. So on December 23, 1966, the Mad Axeman was taken from the flat by Albert Donahue and Teddy Smith. As he climbed into the van, he was shot and killed. At least that's the story told to police by Donahue, that had the three Kray brothers and Pat Connolly arrested for the murder. Ron tells a different story. He said that after the letters failed, Frank was given a new identity and sent to continental Europe. He denied having him killed, but admitted that he would probably never be seen again, and he hasn't. So take that however you want. On June 14, 1967, Reg's wife Frances was found by her father. She was unresponsive, and an empty bottle of sleeping pills was lying next to her. She would never wake up. After her and Reggie's marriage failed, she had tried to end it all at least 2 times. Reggie was devastated by this. Since their separation, he had constantly tried to get back with her, but no luck. Over in Canada, the American Mafia had $2 million in stolen bearer bonds. They were too hot to move in the States or Canada, so the twins were contacted. Leslie Payne was sent to Montreal and purchased 20,000 pounds at 25% of the face value. Payne then helped the twins move the bonds in France and Germany. After this, Leslie began to distance himself from the gang. While Reg was grieving the death of Frances, another problem would emerge that would ultimately doom the gang. A man named Jack the Hat McVitie was a well-known East End drug dealer and tough guy who was strong as a horse, who loved booze, women, and amphetamines. He hid his prematurely balding head under a hat that he wore constantly, earning him the nickname The Hat. He was sort of a hired gun, and Ron reached out to him when he felt that Leslie Payne was going to testify against him. Leslie had always been closer to Reg than Ron, because Reg saw the money-making potential, but Ron didn't trust him, and his sudden withdrawal from the gang made Ron nervous. Ron and Jack the Hat met at a restaurant. Ron gave him 100 pounds and a promise of 400 more when Payne was dead. Jack took the money, but bungled the hit. He approached Leslie as he walked to his front door, pulled his gun, but lost his nerve and ran off. He promised Ron that he would take care of it, but it was too late. Payne was in the wind. Jack the Hat never returned the 100 pounds, and on top of that, word got back to Ron that Jack was running his mouth saying unflattering things about him. The two had a meeting, and Jack told him that he was sorry and he was broke and going through a lot of things with his family. Ron felt sorry for him and loaned him another 50 pounds. Now, this was a loan. Ron expected to be paid back. A few days later, Jack the Hat went into the Regency, a club owned by one of the Kray associates, drunk and high, carrying a sawed-off shotgun, and he was telling everyone that he was going to kill the twins. Up until this point, Ron was the only one who had killed anyone. Reg would give a man the worst beating, shoot him in the leg, slash or stab him, but he drew the line at murder. When word got back about Jack the Hat, Ron insisted that this time Reg be the one to do the killing. "I've done my one. It's about time you done your one." Reg was in a depressed state and still mourning the death of Frances, and he agreed. On the night of October 29, 1967, Reg got himself good and drunk, and along with Ronnie Bender and Ronnie Hart, went to the Regency looking for Jack, but Jack wasn't there. Reg left his .32 caliber with the bartender, and he and his boys went to the home of a woman named Blonde Carol, the wife of a member serving time, where Ron was waiting. She was having a party, and when Ron realized that Jack the Hat was still alive, he told everyone to leave. He ordered Dickie Hart to go back to the Regency and bring back the .32. He instructed the Lambrianos to go and find Jack the Hat, buy him a drink, and bring it back here under the pretenses of a party. While they waited, Reg fell asleep. A few hours later, the Lambrianos returned with Jack. Jack came in and said with confidence, "Where are the birds and the booze?" But all the color drained from his face when he saw Ron sitting in the chair. At that moment, Reg came up from behind Jack, put the .32 caliber behind his head, and click, the gun jammed. Jack began to beg for his life, but Ron grabbed him. Jack was able to break free and tried to jump from the window of the basement apartment, but he was grabbed and pulled back in. Ron told him, "Be a man." Jack said, "I will be a man, but I don't want to die like one." After the gun jammed again, Reg got a large carving knife out of the kitchen. And with Ron edging him on and Jack begging for mercy, Reg stuck the knife into Jack's face right under his right eye. Jack fell to the floor, and Reg began to stab him repeatedly. Jack the Hat lay dead in a pool of blood. Reg instructed the men to clean up the place before Blonde Carol got home. Meanwhile, Jack's body was placed into the room with her sleeping children until it was rolled up in sheets and taken away by Charlie Kray and Chris Lambriano. It was dumped in a canal and was never recovered. The next day, men came by and removed the rug. Then more men came by with new rugs and furniture. Blonde Carol didn't have to be told to stay quiet. In 1967, an American gangster was trying to muscle in on some of the mafia's clubs in London. The Krays were asked to deal with this, and Ron called longtime fixer Alan Cooper to do the hit. Cooper then brought his man Paul Elvey in to do the deed. The man they were trying to kill was not an easy target. Ron got information that he was supposed to appear at the Old Bailey courthouse for a case that would last a few days. This would be the only place where he could be gotten, but to use a gun or a knife would be a suicide mission. Cooper and Elvey were in a meeting with the Krays, and Cooper produced a small attaché case. He opened it, and inside there was a hypodermic needle held by 2 steel clips. By the handle of the case, there was a small brass ring. Cooper pulled it, and the needle slid forward so that the full length of the needle was projecting through the small hole in the corner of the case. He touched the needle. This released a spring in the case that worked the plunger. The plan was for Elvey to get behind the man, jab him in the leg while inside the courthouse. The syringe was filled with cyanide, and to onlookers, it would appear as if the victim suffered a heart attack. Elvey was taken to the courthouse and shown his victim. Over the next few days, Elvey went to the Old Bailey, but was not able to get the job done. He told Cooper and the Krays that there were just too many cops around. They switched plans. This time a high-powered crossbow was suggested, but Elvey was not able to operate it with any efficiency and the plan was scrapped. By now, they had missed their opportunity. But Ron wanted blood, so someone had to die. The person Ron selected was George Caruana. Caruana was a Maltese club owner who had recently gotten into a beef with another club owner named Bernard Silver, and Silver put a 1,000-pound bounty on his head. Ron figured that killing Caruana would be good for the firm's reputation. Reg was against the idea, but by this time he was suffering from his own depression and didn't have the strength to fight with Ron about it. Ron decided that the best way to kill Caruana was to blow up his car. He drove a red Mini Cooper, and the plan was to place a bomb underneath the car and detonate it remotely. Again, Elvey was chosen as the hitman. He was taken and shown where the target kept his car and driven by the house and shown Caruana himself. The Krays didn't have access to dynamite, so Cooper made arrangements for Elvey to pick some up in Glasgow, Scotland. On April 29, 1968, he was arrested in Glasgow with 6 sticks of dynamite on his way back. Elvey told the cops about both murder plots, named Cooper as his partner and the Krays as the men who hired them. Cooper was brought in and questioned by Scotland Yard's Nipper Reid, who had been given the assignment of getting the Krays and had been compiling evidence against them since their last acquittal, waiting for them to slip up. Cooper also decided to cooperate with the cops. On May 6, Cooper checked himself into a West End nursing home even though he was not sick. He invited the Krays to come visit him. Neither of the twins came, but they sent Thomas Cowley. Cooper had a recording device under the sheets and recorded Cowley talking about the attempts. On May 8, 1968, the Krays and 15 others of the firm were arrested, including brother Charlie. 2 days later, they appeared in court and were given their charges. They were hit with everything that Nipper Reid had on them: the murder plots, the bearer bond scheme, extortion, and credit fraud. A few weeks later, Ron and Charlie were charged with helping Frank Mitchell escape and killing him. Then on June 25th, Ron was charged with killing George Cornell and the Blind Beggar. In October, Reg was charged with the death of Jack the Hat McVitie in Blonde Carol's apartment. During the trial, several members of the firm turned Queen's evidence, including Alan Cooper, who told of the briefcase and crossbow plot. During the proceedings, Ron stood up and said, "I beg your pardon, but will James Bond be presenting evidence in this case? This is ridiculous." Leslie Payne took the stand and told how Ron tried to shake him down and then tried to have him killed. The twins planned to have the men under them take the fall. Ronnie Hart was supposed to eat the Jack the Hat charge. Jack Dickinson, who was only the driver, was supposed to take the Cornell charge, and Albert Donahue was to take the charge in the Mitchell case. When presented with this plan, The men refused, and Donahue turned Queen's evidence. In March of 1969, the Kray twins were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with the eligibility of parole after 30 years. Their brother Charlie would receive 10 years for his role in the Jack the Hat murder. On January 10, 1970, Ronald was in the east wing of the Durham jail. While the rest of the inmates were watching TV, Ron slipped off and slipped both of his wrists. Another inmate noticed him and notified the guards. Ron was taken to the prison hospital and treated for his wounds. Ronald was transferred to the Parkhurst prison, and even in jail, he couldn't keep his hands to himself. 4 months after he tried to end it all, he assaulted an officer and was given 5 days in the hole. In 1979, Ron was declared insane and sent to Broadmoor Mental Institution. Despite his behavior, Ron was given permission along with Reg to attend their mother's funeral in 1982. In 1985, Ron got married to Elaine Midler. In 1989, they would get divorced. He married again in 1990. This too would end the divorce. On March 17, 1995, Ronald Kray died of a heart attack in Broadmoor Hospital. He was 61 years old. Reg would be released to attend the funeral. In 2000, Reg was diagnosed with terminal bladder cancer, and he was given a compassionate release and died on October 1st, 2000 at the age of 66. And that, my friends, is the skinny on the Kray twins. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. I hope you learned some things about the Kray twins you didn't know already. This was a very interesting story to me. A lot of things I had to leave out, so I think I'm going to do a follow-up video, at least for the members, a little short 5-minute video or something like that. Maybe on the Richardsons and some of their cases. But so if you're new to the channel and you like what we do over here at A Few Bad Men, bump off that subscribe button and join the gang. Break that thumb, ring the bell, set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. If you want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss, the PayPal link is down below. Go to the merch store, get yourself something nice, get your girl something nice, get your guy something nice. I'm going to be back with I think I'm coming back to the States. I got somebody I want to do a little quick video for you guys. Finish up some stuff that I did last year. All right, so this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see you in the funnies.